Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're headed to the Western Front, not the kind of war from recruiting posters, all gleaming bayonets and waving flags, but the kind with mud that swallows boots, food that comes out of a tin, and the constant background knowledge that the air itself might one day kill you. It's somewhere between 1915 and 1917, and you're a newly minted British soldier, sent to hold a narrow strip of earth that no one really owns. You've been issued a uniform, a rifle, and a satchel containing a canvas and rubber contraption they assure you will keep you alive. They don't tell you how little time you'll have to put it on when the moment comes. Before we march you into the mud, the smoke, and the quiet that follows a whistle blast, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you listen to these in bed, consider using a pair of wireless sleep earbuds for enhanced immersion. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed for side sleepers. I've linked my favourite pair in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You step down from the back of the lorry into a churned expanse of mud that might once have been a farmer's field. The air smells of wet earth, wood smoke, and the faint mineral tang of something burned long ago. A corporal you've never seen before, collar turned up against the wind, mutters for you to keep your head down, though there isn't a single rifle crack in the air. He gestures vaguely toward the horizon, as if that explains everything. The lorry rattles off behind you, leaving only the cough of its exhaust and a brief outline of dust. Ahead, a track barely wide enough for two men winds through the open field. The corporal sets off at a pace that isn't quite urgent but offers no chance for lingering. You fall in behind him, the strap of your kit biting into your shoulder. Somewhere far away, so faint you almost mistake it for thunder, a gun fires. The sound is followed by another, deeper one, as if the first shot had found an answer. It's not the clean, decisive sound you expected from your drills at home. Just a distant, softened thump, like heavy furniture being dropped in another room. The march is quiet, save for the slap of boots on damp ground and the occasional rattle of mess tins. You pass through what might have been a hedge, now nothing more than a line of rotted stumps and shredded branches. The ground dips and rises without warning, sometimes revealing long strips of low waterlogged land. Pools reflect the leaden sky, their surfaces broken by scattered reeds that have somehow survived. The corporal stops once peering into the distance, then resumes without comment. Somewhere out there is the front line you've been sent to, but the land between here and there gives little away. After half an hour, you hear a sharper sound. Not a gun this time, but the staccato of boots approaching. A group of soldiers comes into view along the track, walking in the opposite direction. Their uniforms are the same as yours, but darker with mud, stiffened in places where the fabric has dried in crusted folds. One man's puttees have come undone and flap against his legs. Another's helmet is slung from his hand, the chin strap frayed and split. They pass without more than a glance, no nods, no words of encouragement, just eyes fixed ahead on the empty field behind you, as if there's something there worth seeing. The track narrows and begins to cut into the earth itself, the banks on either side rising until they block most of the wind. The smell changes, growing denser, heavier, part damp vegetation, part smoke, part something you can't place. Here and there, you catch sight of timber planks shoring up the earth, their surfaces scored by shovel marks. At one bend, the corporal gestures toward a low, dark slit in the bank. "Support trench," he says without slowing. You catch only a glimpse inside, a short section of duckboard and a rusted brazier sitting cold on the floor. Further along, you hear the front before you see it. The sound is irregular, bursts of gunfire, then nothing, followed by a single shell that lands so far away it might as well be on another planet. The pauses between the noises are stranger than the noises themselves. In those gaps, you hear the rustle of your own clothes, the breathing of the man ahead, the distant hiss of wind through grass that should not still be standing. The track finally bends sharply and drops into a cutting so deep the sky becomes a narrow strip overhead. You descend behind the corporal, the smell intensifying with each step. It is wetter here, the air heavy with rot and coal smoke. A few yards on, the cutting opens onto a narrow trench lined with sandbags, their fabric dark and sagging. Water seeps through gaps in the boards underfoot. A pair of soldiers are seated on an overturned crate, sharing a cigarette. They look up briefly as you pass, then return to watching the smoke curl in the still air. The corporal leads you down a side trench, no wider than your outstretched arms. The walls are close enough that your elbows brush against damp canvas. Overhead, the sky's a thin grey strip, and the light seems to weaken the further you go. Your boots scrape on warped duckboards. In places, the boards are missing, leaving nothing but black mud that clings to your soles. The sound of gunfire is muffled here, reduced to distant, hollow thumps. Somewhere above you, a voice calls out, answered by another you cannot see. You begin to feel the weight of your pack more keenly, the strap digging into your shoulder, the boards underfoot creak in complaint at every step. Then, without warning, the trench widens slightly, revealing a wooden door frame set into the earth. The door itself is rough planked, its hinges dark with rust. The corporal stops, turns, and gestures toward it. "Here we are," he says, his voice low enough that you almost miss it. He opens the door, and the smell of damp wood and lamp oil washes over you. The dugout beyond is barely tall enough for you to stand upright. The walls are timber-lined, but dark with moisture. The floor is uneven, sloping gently toward one corner, where a bucket sits. A single oil lamp hangs from a hook, its light weak but steady. The air inside is warmer, though not by much. A narrow bench runs along one wall, and a pair of coats hang from nails above it. "This is home," the corporal says, stepping aside to let you enter. His tone carries neither sarcasm nor welcome, just a statement of fact. You step through, and as he pulls the door closed, the dim grey of the outside world is replaced entirely by the muted glow of the lamp. The sound of distant guns fades, leaving only the creak of timber and the faint drip of water somewhere in the corner. The lamplight in the dugout is dim and yellow, barely enough to soften the shadows clinging to the timber walls. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, tinned meat, and wet boots, each scent layered over the other until you can no longer separate them. Around you, men sit or crouch in narrow spaces, their movements slow and deliberate, as if conserving energy for something you haven't yet seen. A tin mug passes from one man to another without ceremony. No one bothers to wipe the rim. Somewhere above, water drips steadily, each splash into the bucket in the corner, marking the passage of time in a way that a clock never could. You keep your pack close to your knees, unsure if there's a proper place for it here. The corporal who brought you has already moved on, swallowed by the maze of the trench system. In his absence, there's no welcome, no introduction, only the low murmur of voices that rise and fall without urgency. A man at the far bench tightens the laces of his boots with a grunt, then leans forward to pour tea from a battered pot into a tin the size of his palm. The steam rises, briefly cutting through the heavier smells before dissipating. The dugout is warm compared to the outside air, though it's the sort of warmth that comes from being crowded, not from any deliberate effort to heat the place. You notice the walls sweating with condensation, small rivulets running down the planks and pooling where the floor sags. Overhead, something scuttles, its claws clicking on the boards. One of the men glances up, follows the sound for a moment, and then ignores it. You realise, with a faint twist in your gut, that he's used to it. After a time, a voice addresses you, not directly, but in your direction, and explains the routine. Stand to at dawn and dusk, rifles ready. You'll be told your watch times. Latrine's the far end of the support trench. Don't wait till you're desperate. you might not have the chance later. The man delivering this information doesn't look up from the pair of socks he's wringing out. His fingers pale and swollen from cold water. There's no ceremony to it, no sense of making you feel at home. It's just the way things are, and now you know them. You nod, even though you're not sure he's looking at you. The details settle into your mind as if they were always meant to be there. Dawn and dusk watch shifts, the latrine at the far end. You picture it in your mind, a plank over a trench maybe, or something worse, and decide you'd rather not confirm the image until you have to. A few feet away, a man methodically cleans the bolt of his rifle, each movement practiced and quiet. He hums to himself under his breath, not a song you recognize. The sound above you comes again, a sudden, quick scramble across the planks, followed by a faint squeal that dies as quickly as it began. You glance up instinctively, but the lamplight doesn't reach high enough to show anything. The older men don't react. One of them, noticing your attention, smirks faintly and says, "You'll get used to the rats. They're just part of the furniture here." He doesn't sound amused. It's more like stating a law of nature. Later, as the dugout quiets, a man across from you speaks without lifting his eyes from the bit of cloth he's stitching. "They ever tell you about the gas?" His tone is flat, almost bored, as though asking if you'd heard about the tea ration. You hesitate, unsure if he's making conversation or trying to unsettle you. When you say no, he shrugs and keeps working. It rolls low like a morning fog. You'll hear the gongs first, then the shouting. You've got seconds to get your mask on, or you'll wish you did. Don't bother holding your breath. It won't help. You ask what it smells like, though you're not sure you want to know. He pauses, needle held in the air, and says, "Chlorine? Like bleach but sharper? Phosgene's trickier, sweet like bad fruit. Trouble is, if you smell it too strong, you're already in it." Then he goes back to his stitching. The conversation apparently over. His voice had no hint of drama or storytelling, no effort to frighten you. It's simply information, like the watch schedule or the latrine's location. That, more than anything, makes it sit uneasily in your mind. You find yourself glancing toward your pack, where the canvas satchel of your gas mask rests under your coat. You haven't taken it out since you were issued it. Haven't even practiced more than twice at the depot. The thought of fumbling with it in the dark, with shouting all around, makes your stomach feel tight. A burst of muffled laughter from another part of the trench filters in through the dugout walls, followed by the scrape of boots on duckboards. Life goes on outside, apparently unaffected by your thoughts. The lamplight flickers, catching on the edge of a dented mess tin someone has left by the bench. You can feel the day's damp still clinging to your clothes, a slow, creeping chill settling into your joints. Someone moves toward the door, ducking to avoid hitting his helmet on the lintel, and a brief draft brings in the smell of earth and smoke from the trench outside. When the door shuts again, the air seems heavier, less willing to circulate. A man in the corner begins to snore softly, head tilted back against the wall. Others stretch out on narrow planks, boots left on, coats pulled up to their chins. You mimic them, unrolling your blanket and laying it over the rough boards assigned to you. The surface is uneven, pressing into your shoulder blades and hips in all the wrong places. You shift, trying to find a position where your knees aren't bent too sharply, but the dugout wasn't built with comfort in mind. The lamplight casts long shadows on the wall, making the timbers seem to swell and contract with each flicker. Somewhere above, the scuttling starts again, this time slower, like something searching. You pull the blanket tighter, less for warmth than for the sense of a barrier between you and whatever else shares this space. Your ears strain for the sound of distant guns, but all you hear is the slow breathing of the men around you and the occasional drip of water into the bucket. Sleep doesn't come easily. You turn from one side to the other, the boards groaning faintly beneath you, the blanket twisting around your legs. The air feels heavy in your lungs, as though the dugout itself is pressing down. There's no shelling tonight, no barrage to shake the earth, but that somehow makes it worse. Nothing to cover the sound of your own breathing or to distract from the quiet weight of the place. You close your eyes and try to will yourself into rest, but the thought of the man's flat voice lingers, replaying in your mind. You've got seconds to get your mask on, or you'll wish you did. The words settle in, and you know you won't forget them. The cold reaches you before the light does. When the call for stanza comes, it drags you out of the shallow, unsettled sleep you'd been drifting in and out of for hours. You push yourself upright on the narrow plank bed, joints stiff from the night, and pull your coat tighter before stepping out into the trench. The air is damp enough that your breath hangs in front of you. A thin grey light seeps over the horizon, just enough to turn the outlines of the sandbags from black to slate. The men around you move with quiet efficiency, checking rifles, adjusting puttees, settling helmets. The order is unspoken but understood. Get to a firing step, rifles up, eyes forward, scan the ground in front of you for movement. No man's land lies ahead, like a bad dream you've half forgotten. In the early light, it is less a place than a texture. Uneven earth, pools of stagnant water, and the skeletal remains of trees reduced to jagged posts. The fog hangs low, clinging to hollows and craters, moving slightly as the faintest wind passes over it. You shift your grip on the rifle and rest the barrel lightly on the top sandbag, peering into that mist. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of your sight, the other side is doing much the same. The silence is deceptive. Behind it is the knowledge that the day could turn quickly if someone decided it should. The corporal stands a few paces down the line, his shoulders hunched as he studies the ground. When he catches your glance, he raises his chin slightly toward a stretch of earth about 50 yards out. "See where it's lighter?" he says, voice low but carrying in the quiet. You follow his gaze and make out a patch where the grass, what little of it there is, looks yellowed, brittle even at this distance. "That's where they used gas last month," he continues, almost conversational. "Killed a few of ours, more of theirs. Wind changed halfway through." He doesn't elaborate, and you're not sure whether that means the story is over or simply not worth telling in detail. He turns back to the horizon without another word. The fog begins to lift slowly, the dim outlines of distant wire and craters taking on more definition. The dampness seeps through your gloves, numbing your fingers where they grip the rifle. A man to your right clears his throat and spits into the mud, then rubs a hand over his stubbled jaw. The movements are small, conserving warmth and energy. Someone further down the line mutters about the tea being ready soon, and the news travels quietly along the trench like a piece of gossip, bringing the faintest shift in posture among the men. When the order to stand down comes, it's not shouted but spoken with the authority of something that happens every day in exactly the same way. The line loosens, rifles are lowered, and the men move toward the small fire tucked in a sheltered recess just off the main trench. It's more embers than flame, but it's enough to heat the battered pot balanced on 2 bricks. The tea inside smells faintly of smoke and iron. The water drawn from somewhere you're better off not thinking about. Beside the fire sits a crate with this morning's bread ration, a rough loaf already divided into thin, uneven chunks. You're handed one without ceremony, the crust already soft from the damp air. The tea is poured into a tin mug, dark and cloudy, more an excuse for warmth than a drink. The first sip burns your tongue, but the heat is welcome, and you hold the mug between both hands as if to draw the warmth into your bones. Around you, the men stand or lean against the trench wall, taking small bites of bread, soaking the crust in the tea to soften it. The corporal joins the group, his helmet pushed back slightly, and for a moment he looks less like the man who pointed out death-stained grass, and more like just another soldier trying to get through a morning. It's during this lull that you hear a more detailed explanation of the gas alarms. It comes not as an official instruction, but as part of the casual conversation that drifts between the men. "You'll hear the whistle first," someone says, tapping the side of his helmet with 2 fingers. That's the sentry giving the shout. Then the gongs, big shell casings hung up on wire, gets hit with a hammer so the sound carries. He takes a bite of bread, chews, swallows. After that, it's just how fast you can get your mask on. Fast enough and you'll still be standing. Too slow. He leaves the thought unfinished, taking another sip of tea instead. Another man adds his own detail without looking up from his mug. In a real one, you'll hear it all at once. The whistle, the gong, the shouting. Don't wait to see what's going on. You'll smell it soon enough if it's the real thing, and by then you're already behind. His tone isn't grim, just practical, the way someone might warn you not to leave your rifle out in the rain. The words sink into the quiet, and no one tries to lighten them. By the second week in the trench, you've stopped flinching at every shell that lands in the distance. The noise has become part of the background. Just another sound, layered over the constant drip of water, the shuffle of boots, and the low murmur of men talking in corners. The only shells that pull you out of whatever you're doing now are the ones close enough to shake the walls. And even then, it's less fear than the quick calculation of whether you should be somewhere else. The days have settled into a rhythm of work and watchfulness, each job handed to you without discussion, as if you've been here long enough to know what's expected. Your duties rotate without warning. One morning you're standing sentry on the firing step, scanning the fog-thick no-man's land for movement, your eyes stinging from the wind. The next afternoon, you're a messenger, moving between sections of trench with orders sealed in your coat pocket, ducking through the zigzags while the mud tries to claim your boots. Some days you're given repair work, stacking sandbags where the rain has collapsed the wall, or hammering new boards into place on a stretch of rotting duckboards. The tools are worn, the nails are bent, and everything takes longer than it should. But you've stopped expecting efficiency here. You begin to notice how the trench smells different after rain. In dry weather, or as dry as it ever gets here, it's a mix of smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of latrines too close to the living spaces. But after rain, it's heavier, earthier, and laced with a smell like old cabbage rising from the mud itself. The air clings to your clothes and works its way into your hair. No amount of brushing or wiping changes it. You carry it with you, and so does everyone else. In the quieter stretches, you wander through parts of the trench you haven't been assigned to. Some bays sit empty, half collapsed, with sandbags split open, and their contents spilling into the mud. In these forgotten corners, you notice gas masks hanging from hooks. Not the satchels you've been told to keep at arm's reach, but the masks themselves, long since abandoned. The rubber is stiff, the eyepieces clouded with age and dirt. Straps dangle uselessly, frayed to the point of breaking. You can't imagine anyone trusting their life to one of these now. No one cleans them, no one even moves them. They hang there like warnings, or perhaps like trophies from a time when the war still felt new enough for people to keep count of such things. Once you ask an older private why they're still there, but he only shrugs and says, because they're dead weight, before moving on. You're left unsure whether he means the masks or the men who once wore them. On one repair shift, you're assigned to work with 2 other men to reinforce a parapet that's been eroded by weeks of wind and rain. The sandbags here slump against each other, their seams weeping damp earth. As you shovel fresh dirt into new bags, your spade strikes something hard, a metal cylinder half buried in the wall. It's a spent shell casing, greened with age, its surface dented and split. The others barely glance at it before one of them wedges it deeper into the wall and covers it with fresh earth. There's no discussion. It's just something that doesn't need to be there, so it's made invisible again. Night watches have lost some of their novelty. At first, you thought the darkness would feel like cover, a chance to relax your vigilance, but instead it presses closer. Shapes shift in the corner of your vision, and the sound of wind through the wire sometimes mimics the faint scrape of boots. On more than one occasion, you've raised your rifle to your shoulder, heart pounding, only to lower it again when nothing emerges from the dark. You've learned to trust the stillness as much as the movement, sometimes more. As the days pass, you see the unspoken patterns among the men. Certain places in the trench are avoided without comment, usually because they're too exposed or too prone to flooding. Some jobs are traded quietly, a man swapping his turn on sentry duty for another's repair shift, both pretending it's a fair exchange. The routines are shaped as much by preference and superstition as by orders. It's during one of these stretches of quiet work that you notice the real gas masks, the ones you're meant to rely on, always within reach. They hang from hooks inside dugouts, sit on benches beside sleeping men, or are worn slung across the chest on their canvas straps. You've learned to keep yours close enough that you can reach it in the dark. But you also know that even the best kept mask here has its flaws. You've seen the eyepieces fog over in the damp, the straps twist in a man's haste. There's no guarantee of anything. Late one afternoon, after an uneventful day of shifting sandbags and checking duckboards, you're told to fetch wire from the supply dugout. It's not far, just along the support trench, and down a narrow passage you haven't taken before. The boards underfoot are slick, and the walls close in enough that your shoulders brush the damp timbers as you pass. When you reach the dugout, the door is already open, the dim interior lit by a single oil lamp that throws a narrow halo on the walls. Inside, the air is cooler, with a faint smell of grease and canvas. The shelves are lined with coils of barbed wire, boxes of nails, and stacks of sandbags. But what catches your eye first is the neat pile of gas masks in their khaki satchels, stacked waist-high against one wall. They look new, the canvas clean and the straps neatly buckled. It's the first time you've seen so many in one place without signs of wear. The quartermaster is leaning against the opposite wall, his hands in his pockets, watching you. He doesn't speak, and you don't feel inclined to either. You step toward the shelves to find the wire you were sent for. The fog that evening is thicker than you've seen it since arriving, a damp grey curtain that seems to cling to the walls of the trench and flatten every sound. Visibility is barely 50 yards, and even that feels generous. Shapes beyond the nearest traverse are reduced to smudges, their movements little more than shadows shifting in the murk. You're on sentry duty, standing on the firing step with your rifle resting lightly against the parapet, watching the whiteness for any sign of motion. The cold creeps into your fingers despite the gloves, and every breath leaves a pale cloud that hangs in the still air before dissolving. The fog seems to carry its own weight, pressing down, making the world feel smaller and closer. For the first hour, the monotony is only broken by the occasional rustle of wire as it sags under the damp. Somewhere off to your left, a man coughs into his sleeve, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the fog. Your ears strain for the usual background noises, the distant crump of artillery, the mutter of voices from a nearby bay, but the mist has a way of smothering them until they seem far away and unimportant. It's just you, the cold, and the blank space ahead. The first sign that anything is different comes as a faint whistle blast from somewhere down the line. At first, you're not sure you heard it. It's thin, almost delicate, and the fog muddles the direction. A second follows, sharper and more urgent, and then a shout cuts through the stillness. Gas! Gas! The word slices cleanly through the air, impossible to mistake. The effect is instant. Boots thud on duckboards, equipment clatters, and men scramble toward their stations. Your heart leaps into a frantic rhythm before your mind has time to catch up. Your hands fumble with the strap of your satchel, the canvas stiff under your gloves. You yank at the flap, fingers clumsy, and pull out the mask in a motion that feels far slower than it should. The rubber is cold the eyepiece is already misting from the change in temperature as you press it against your face. Straps twist as you try to fit them over your helmet, and you rip the chin strap free without thinking. Just to get the mask in place, the air inside smells faintly of rubber and stale sweat from the last time you wore it. Around you, the trench is alive with movement. A man to your right has already pulled his mask into place, his breathing loud and mechanical through the filter. Further down, another struggles with a twisted strap, muttering curses that are half swallowed by the rubber pressed over his mouth. Somewhere beyond sight, a gong clangs, the deep metallic ring of a shell casing being struck. Over and over, the sound carrying in jagged bursts through the fog. The noise is at once reassuring and unsettling. It means the alarm is reaching others, but it also means someone believes the danger is real enough to spread. You stand there, every muscle taut, eyes scanning the grey for the telltale rolling shape of a gas cloud. The fog plays tricks, thickening in one place, thinning in another, making it impossible to tell if anything unnatural is moving toward you. The smell of damp earth fills your nostrils through the mask, metallic and sour. Your pulse is a steady drum in your ears. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shouting dies. The gong stops. The men stop moving. One by one, masks come off. Some men peel them away slowly, as though half expecting to be wrong. Others tug them down, with a single irritated motion. You hesitate, unsure whether it's over, until the man nearest you waves a hand toward his bare face and says, "Off with it, lad. Drill's done." The air inside the mask is warm and close, and when you pull it free, the cold rushes in, sharp and clean. The fog smells the same as it did before. No bleach, no sweet fruit, no acrid bite, just wet air and the faint smoke from a brazier somewhere down the trench. There's a low murmur of voices as the men resettle themselves, some checking their straps, others tucking masks back into satchels, with the resigned air of having been through this more times than they care to count. One soldier, older than most, leans against the trench wall with a small dry smile. His helmet sits slightly askew, and he doesn't bother to straighten it. His laugh is quiet, almost to himself, but in the stillness it carries just far enough for you to hear. No one else joins in. The sound has no warmth to it, just the edge of someone who's seen the same thing too often to take it seriously anymore. You climb down from the firing step and let your shoulders drop, the tension ebbing now that you know there's no gas curling toward you. Your fingers still feel stiff from gripping the mask, and there's a faint dampness on your face where the rubber sealed against your skin. The fog has begun to thin, though only slightly, revealing more of the trench in blurred outlines. The men drift back toward their posts or their dugouts, movement slower now, as though the urgency of a few minutes ago was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. By the time you make it back to your dugout, the lamp inside has been lit, casting a small circle of gold in the dimness. The older soldier who laughed is already there, stretched out on his plank bed, with his coat pulled around his shoulders. He doesn't look up as you enter, just shifts enough to make space for you to pass. His eyes are half closed, his breathing steady, but before you can settle yourself, he speaks, voice low and matter-of-fact. "Next time, Sia," he says. "It won't be practice." The words hang in the air for a moment, heavier than the fog outside. Then he rolls onto his side, facing the wall, and the conversation is over. One day there's a lull in the noise. After a week of near-constant shelling, the sudden quiet feels almost unnatural. You wake expecting the usual percussion of blasts, the dull thumps in the distance, and the sharper cracks closer to home. But instead there is only the sound of boots moving on duckboards and the slow drip of water into puddles. The trench seems to breathe differently without the bombardment pressing down on it. Even the air feels lighter, though the smell of damp earth and old smoke still hangs, as it always does. For a moment, you almost believe you could forget where you are, until your eyes land on the splintered edges of the sandbags above you and the jagged posts of barbed wire silhouetted against the dull sky. The lull brings with it small rituals that have been neglected. Fires are coaxed back to life in sheltered corners, smoke curling lazily before dissolving into the cold air. Men who have been hoarding their rations now bring them out, not in generosity exactly, but with the recognition that a quiet day is a rare thing and deserves its own kind of observance. You find yourself sitting with your section around a battered crate that serves as both table and bench. Someone has produced a tin of bully beef, its contents glistening with a pale, greasy sheen. The lid is pried off with the tip of a bayonet, the metal bending with a creak, and the smell, salty and faintly metallic, fills the space between you. Biscuits, as hard as the duckboards under your boots, are passed around, each man giving his a few perfunctory knocks against the crate, as though it might somehow soften. A mess tin is produced for the beef, and each man takes a share with the same economy of motion that governs everything here. No waste, no indulgence, just enough to quiet the stomach. You chew slowly, the biscuit softening only because the warmth of your mouth eventually forces it to. The beef is heavy and oily, sticking to your teeth, but it is food, and food here is more about function than pleasure. The talk is quiet at first, mostly about the work that still needs doing. A section of trench that needs shoring, a firing step that's sagging in the middle. Then the conversation drifts, as it inevitably does, to the things no one really wants to think about, but no one can quite ignore. Stories begin to circulate about gas attacks in other sectors. One man swears that, in a village to the north, they saw a green cloud rolling over the fields like a tide, moving low and fast. He says the men who saw it tried to run, but the gas caught them before they reached cover, and they went down, clawing at their throats. Another insists, the worst is the gas you can't see. Phosgene, he calls it. That smells sweet, almost like rotting fruit, and doesn't drop you straight away. He says it creeps into your lungs quietly, so you think you're fine until hours later when you can't catch your breath, no matter how hard you try. A third voice cuts in to say the sweet smell is just a rumour to scare green men, that most of the time there's no warning at all. You listen, not sure which version is closer to the truth, and wonder whether it matters. Whether it rolls in like a storm, or hides in the air you're already breathing, the end result seems to be the same. You find yourself glancing at the satchel at your side, feeling for the familiar weight of the mask. It's there, as it always is, though the reassurance is faint. You remember the false alarm and how your hands shook as you tried to get the straps untangled. You think about the pile of new masks in the supply dugout, the way the quartermaster looked at you without saying a word. You've yet to decide whether his silence was meant to comfort or to warn. As the day stretches on, the trench remains quiet. The occasional shot cracks from somewhere down the line, but it's the kind fired almost out of habit, not as part of an engagement. Men use the lull to write letters, to shave, to patch their uniforms. Someone even produces a small deck of cards, their edges softened from constant handling. The game is subdued, played more for the occupation of hands than for any real competition. You catch snippets of talk about home, about food that isn't tinned or dry as wood, about beds that don't rock under you when the earth shakes. Evening comes without ceremony, the sky darkening into the kind of overcast that hides the stars. The temperature drops with the light, the air cooling enough that your breath becomes visible again. The fires are banked low to keep their glow hidden, and men retreat to their dugouts in ones and twos. The conversation dies down until all that's left is the occasional cough or the quiet scrape of boots as someone changes position on the firing step. You wake before the stand to call, the dugout still in half darkness, the lamp above you burned down to the last of its oil. Your mouth is dry, the taste metallic, as though you'd been breathing through a handful of pennies in your sleep. Swallowing doesn't help. It only seems to spread the tang further, and when you sit up, the back of your throat catches with a faint itch. You listen for a moment to the quiet outside. No shelling, no shouted orders, just the muffled movements of men shifting in their blankets and the distant drip of water against boards. It's the kind of stillness that should feel like a reprieve, but instead makes the skin along your arms tighten. When you step out into the trench, the light is flat and grey, the sky the colour of unpolished tin. The air feels thick, unmoving, and without the usual bite of wind you've grown used to in the early hours. You realise quickly that what you can feel is coming from the wrong direction. The faintest breath of air drifts across your face from the enemy lines, carrying with it the smell of damp earth that isn't your own. It's subtle enough that you could almost convince yourself you imagined it, but the memory of the men sleeping with their masks beside them the night before keeps you from dismissing it entirely. The sergeant is already on the firing step, hunched over the periscope. The metal legs creak as he adjusts the angle, his eyes narrowed as though the fogless air offers more than it should. You climb up beside him, watching the muscles in his jaw shift as he scans the ground beyond the wire. Without looking at you, he mutters, "Perfect gas day." The words are spoken softly, as though he's talking to himself, but the meaning is clear enough. You glance toward the horizon, but all you see are the usual ridges and scars of no man's land, the earth pale where the frost still clings. The morning's duties begin without any formal change in orders, the work doled out, as it always is. You're sent with 2 others to repair a stretch of the trench wall, where the sandbags have begun to slump and split under the weight of rainwater. The ground here is soft, your boots sinking just enough to make every step an effort. The wall itself is bowed inward, the top layer of bags collapsing onto the firing step. You take up a shovel and begin to scrape away the worst of the mud, filling fresh sacks and hefting them into place. The work is slow, and the cold keeps your fingers clumsy. You find yourself falling into the familiar rhythm of filling, tying and stacking. The sound of the shovel biting into the earth, blending with the occasional murmur from the men beside you. It's only when your shovel strikes something solid, with a dull metallic thud, that the motion stops. You kneel, brushing away the dirt with gloved fingers, until the curved edge of a shell casing emerges, its surface mottled with rust. It's small, perhaps an artillery shell fragment rather than a full casing, but as you lift it free, the smell reaches you. It's faint, barely more than a whisper against the damp air, but it's unlike anything you've smelled in the trench before. There's a sharpness to it, acrid and dry, that makes you pull your head back slightly. For a moment you think of the stories, of bleach, of sweet rot, of smells you might not recognise until it's already too late, and your stomach knots. You turn the casing over in your hands, the metal flaking slightly under your grip, and see the faint, oily sheen inside the lip where the dirt hasn't reached. One of the other men notices your pause and glances over, but when you hold it up, he only shrugs. "Old," he says, and goes back to his shovelling. You set the casing down beside the wall, half buried again in the loose dirt, and return to the work. Still the smell lingers in your nose, long after it's gone from your hands, clinging like damp smoke. By midday the repairs are nearly done, the new sandbags stacked neatly where the wall had sagged. The sergeant passes by, glancing at the work without slowing, and moves on to the next section. There's no mention of the wind, but you catch more than one man checking the satchel at his side, fingers brushing the straps before moving on. A kettle boils somewhere nearby, the sound muffled by the boards, and the faint aroma of tea drifts through the still air. It should be comforting, but instead it seems out of place, too ordinary for a day when every breath feels measured. When the work detail is dismissed, you make your way back through the zigzag of the trench toward the dugout. The air inside is warmer, but it still carries that underlying dampness that never really leaves. You set your kit down, the weight pulling at your shoulders, and glance toward your bedroll. The satchel with your mask hangs from a nail in the wall where you usually leave it. close enough to reach but not something you think about often once it's in place. Today, you unhook it and set it directly beside your blanket, the canvas brushing against your hand as you settle onto the plank. You tell yourself it's only for convenience, that there's no harm in keeping it nearer, but you don't move it again. It rains the next evening, the slow, steady kind that soaks into everything without hurry. It slides off the sandbags in greasy rivulets, trickles down the timbers, and pools on the duckboards until every step sends a ripple through the shallow water. The trench walls glisten in the lamplight, and the air is thick with the sour smell of latrines, sharper than usual in the damp. You move carefully along the firing step, feeling the boards shift slightly under your weight, the slick surface forcing you to place each foot with care. The cold has a way of creeping under your coat and settling in your joints, making your shoulders ache when you try to hunch them against the rain. A few of the men are gathered under an improvised shelter, a length of canvas strung between two bays, sagging under the weight of water, but still holding. The space beneath is just wide enough for 3 men to stand shoulder to shoulder without brushing against the walls, and it smells of wet wool and tobacco. You step in to join them, grateful for even this partial reprieve from the rain, and feel the warmth of their bodies in the close space. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a greying beard stubble and eyes that seem fixed somewhere far beyond the trench, leans back against the wall and lights a cigarette, cupping the flame from the wind. It's him who starts talking first, his voice low enough that you have to lean slightly forward to hear over the hiss of rain. "First chlorine I ever saw," he says, exhaling smoke that curls upward to be caught in the damp air, turned the whole sky green. Not the bright kind, sickly, like copper left out too long. Came rolling over the ridge, like the fog does here. You could see it swallowing the ground. He takes another drag, eyes narrowing against the smoke, and for a moment, it's as if he's watching it happen again. Some lads got their masks on quick, others... He lets the sentence hang, as though there's no need to finish it. Another man, thinner and younger but with the same weathered look about the eyes, shifts his weight and speaks without looking at you. "Chlorine'll scare you, but it's not the worst. Real killer's phosgene. No warning smell. Nothing to see. Just breathing like normal, thinking you're fine. Then hours later, you're choking like your lungs have turned to mud." He pulls his coat tighter, the movement jerky, almost impatient, and spits onto the duckboards. That's the one you don't hear much about until it gets someone you know. The first man nods slightly, but his gaze stays fixed on some point beyond the trench wall. Truth is, the mask'll help if you get it on in time. But the gas has a way of finding the gaps. Straps too loose, eyepiece cracked. Breathing it in even for a few seconds is enough. He drops his cigarette butt into the puddle at his feet, where it hisses before going dark. His tone hasn't changed once. No dramatic pause, no raised voice. Just a slow delivery of facts, the way you might explain the best way to patch a leaking sandbag. You shift in place, feeling the wet of your coat seep through to your shirt, and glance between them. There's a weight to their words that isn't in their voices, something in the way they never quite meet your eyes, as though doing so would make the conversation more personal than it's meant to be. You're left with the sense that these aren't warnings in the usual sense, meant to keep you alive. They're simply statements of how things are here, like the fact that the rain will always find a way through the roof. One of them reaches into his pocket and produces a small tin, tapping it against his palm before opening it to reveal a few last shreds of tobacco. He rolls a cigarette with fingers that move more by habit than attention, the paper crinkling softly. As he works, he adds, "Sometimes you'll hear the lads talking about sweet smells, flowers, apples, that sort of thing. Don't count on it. Might be true for one man, not for another. By the time you've decided what you smell, it won't matter." He seals the roll with a quick lick, tucks it into the corner of his mouth, and lights it from the end of a match held low between his knees. The talk drifts away after that, replaced by the sound of the rain pattering on the canvas overhead and the faint crackle of burning tobacco. You can feel the damp seeping into your boots, your socks growing heavy and cold. One of the men glances toward the firing step, then back at you, as if to remind you that you have a shift coming. You nod and step out into the rain, the shelter's brief warmth already fading. The trench seems quieter now, the usual murmur of voices muffled by the weather. A lone figure walks toward you, head down, carrying a coil of wire over one shoulder. He passes without a word, boots splashing through the puddles between the duckboards. Somewhere further along, the glow of a brazier flickers faintly against the wall, the smoke mixing with the rain until both vanish into the darkness above. When you reach your dugout later, shaking the rain from your coat before ducking inside, the air feels warmer but no less heavy. The lamp throws its weak light over the plank beds and the damp coats hanging from nails along the wall. You're about to unlace your boots when you hear it, a cough from the next dugout over. At first it's just a short rough sound, the kind you might clear your throat with after a long day in the cold, but it comes again and again, each one rasping a little deeper. You pause listening. The rhythm of it is uneven, stopping for a breath only to start up again. Minutes pass and still it doesn't stop. The sound works its way into the background until it's part of the dugout's noise, the creak of timbers, the drip of water. But it stays there, constant, like the rain outside. Eventually, you lie back on your plank bed, but the coughing follows you into the dark, making it hard to tell if you're hearing it with your ears or with the part of your mind that refuses to forget. The morning brings an air so still and clear that it feels wrong. After weeks of rain, fog, and the damp heaviness that hangs low over the trenches, the sudden openness is unsettling. The skies are flat, uniform grey, without breaks or streaks of brighter light, the kind that offers no clue about the weather to come. You can see further than usual along the trench line, the zigzagging parapets standing out sharply instead of blurring into the haze. The quiet makes every sound. The scrape of a boot on duckboards, the hollow clink of a mess tin, seem louder than it should. Even the smell is different, less of wet earth and more of something dry, as though the ground itself is holding its breath. When the work detail is called, you join it without question. A party of 6 is sent out through the sally port to repair sections of the wire that have sagged under the strain of weather and shell fire. It's routine enough that no one says much about it. This is the sort of job that gets done whenever the lull allows. The corporal leads, his bayonet fixed and his steps careful, over the ground between the lines. The rest of you follow in a loose column, rifles slung but ready, your eyes moving constantly over the broken landscape for any hint of movement. No Man's Land looks different in the clarity. You notice details you've missed before, patterns in the destruction that don't seem entirely random. In some places, the grass is flattened in neat swaths, as though pressed down by an invisible hand. In others, it is dead altogether, lying brittle and colourless, the blades snapping when touched. The earth is pitted with shallow craters, their edges softened by rain, but here and there you find ground that is scorched in uneven patches, as though fire had licked over it and moved on. No one comments, but you can feel the way the men's eyes linger a little longer on these spots before they look away. Halfway to the section of wire you've been assigned, the path dips into a shallow hollow. The ground here is softer underfoot, the moisture clinging in a way that suggests it hasn't seen sunlight in days. At the centre of the depression is a puddle, its surface still enough to reflect the low sky. As you step closer, an acrid scent reaches you, sharp and chemical, faint but distinct. It's not the usual tang of mud or rust, and it makes you pause mid-step. You can't place it immediately, but there's something about it that calls to mind cleaning rags and scorched metal. The word bleach flits through your mind before you can push it away. You edge nearer, crouching to get a better look. The water is tinged with a faint yellow, and as you shift your weight, the surface ripples outward. Your boot stirs something just below the film, and a thin, oily sheen spreads across the top in muted colours: pale green, blue, and a sickly bronze that glints briefly before disappearing into the ripples. The smell rises stronger for a moment, catching in the back of your throat, and you stand quickly, turning away as though the act might distance you from it faster. The corporal calls you forward, his voice kept low but firm. You take a last glance at the puddle before moving on, the image of it lingering in your mind even as you step back onto firmer ground. The repair work is straightforward, straightening bent stakes, twisting new wire into place, securing the ends where the previous lines have sagged. Your gloves catch on the barbs more than once, and you can feel the pull in your shoulders from the constant bending and lifting. Around you, the others work with the same mechanical efficiency, their eyes scanning between tasks, never lingering on the horizon for long. When the job is done, the group makes its way back across the open ground. The return trip feels shorter, though the same landmarks are there: the broken fence post leaning at an angle, the small mound of earth that hides a rusted ammunition box, the row of dead grass that stretches like a scar across the field. You find your gaze drawn to it in spite of yourself, noting the way the blades lie in the same direction, as though pushed by wind or water that came and went all at once. It's not the first odd thing you've seen out here, but paired with the memory of the puddle's smell, it sits uneasily in your thoughts. Back inside the trench, the party disperses with little more than nods. The tools are returned to their places, gloves wrung out, rifles checked. You make your way to the dugout, the air inside warmer but close, carrying the mixed scents of wet wool and the lamp's faint smoke. You strip off your outer coat, still damp from kneeling in the hollow, and hang it on a nail, the water dripping steadily into a shallow tin left beneath. The rest of the evening passes in a kind of half-quiet. Men speak in low voices, their words indistinct under the hum of background tasks. A boot being patched, a length of wire coiled neatly on the bench, the scratch of pen on paper as someone writes a letter they may never send. Outside, the rain doesn't come, but the stillness remains, the wind too light to move more than a stray thread of canvas hanging loose over the dugout entrance. When you finally lie down, the plank bed feels harder than usual, the thin blanket failing to take the edge off the wood beneath your shoulder blades. You close your eyes, expecting the usual restless drift into shallow sleep, but the day's images linger behind your eyelids. You see the brittle rows of dead grass, the scorched edges of earth, the flat sky reflected in the puddle, its surface broken by the ripple from your boot. Sleep comes in fragments, and when it does, it carries with it a dream that is more a memory bent out of shape. You're standing in no man's land, but the air is thick and tinted green, curling along the ground in slow, deliberate waves. The puddle's surface glows faintly beneath the mist, the sheen spreading wider and wider until it swallows your boots, then your legs. You open your mouth to call out, but the air is heavy and clings like wet cloth, and no sound comes. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle blows, thin and sharp, but it's already too late to move. You spend the morning on your knees in the bottom of the trench, working a hammer into the warped grain of a duckboard. The boards have swollen from the constant damp, their edges lifting and curling like pages left too close to a fire, and the gaps between them have widened enough to catch a boot heel. It's slow work, easing each nail free and setting the plank back into place, the repetitive thud of the hammer carrying through the still air. The weather has held, the same flat grey sky as the day before, but now there's a faint warmth to the light, as though the clouds have thinned somewhere beyond sight. The first sound is a muffled thump, distant enough that you almost mistake it for someone dropping a heavy crate further down the line. You glance up briefly, but there's no sign of movement along the trench. A few seconds later, A second thump follows, closer this time, with a deeper resonance that seems to pass through the boards under your knees. You feel it in your elbows before you register it as incoming fire. The third comes quicker, sharper, the air carrying the faint vibration along the timbers. It's not the heavy, concussive blast of high explosives. It's more contained, the sound caught and held, as though whatever it is landed softly. You straighten, looking toward the firing step, and that's when the smell reaches you. It's faint at first, barely there, like a ghost of something you half recognize, but can't place. Then it sharpens, cutting through the usual scents of damp, earth and old smoke, a dry chemical edge that prickles at the inside of your nose. You draw in another breath without thinking, and the taste follows, metallic, sour, lingering on the back of your tongue. The air is coming from directly ahead, pushing gently against your face. You realize you've turned into the wind, and the thought makes the muscles in your neck tighten. Somewhere above the curve of the trench wall, a voice shouts. It's too far to catch the words, but the tone carries, urgent, high, commanding. A second later, it comes again, closer this time, and impossible to mistake. Gas! Gas! The word slams into your mind like a physical blow, cutting through whatever else you were thinking. The boards, the tools, the work, all of it falls away in the space of a heartbeat. Around you, the trench changes. Men who had been leaning against the wall are suddenly moving, reaching for their satchels, boots clattering on the duckboards. Someone stumbles in the narrow space, catching himself on the wall before pushing forward again. The sound of straps being yanked open and buckles pulled free fills the air, mingling with the first metallic clang of the gong. The unmistakable ring of a shell casing struck hard and fast, the vibrations carrying down the line. The rhythm is uneven at first, then steadies. The hammer blows echoing in a way that seems to shake the air itself. The smell is stronger now, more insistent, curling into your nostrils, no matter how shallowly you try to breathe. It's as though the air itself has weight, settling in a thin layer that you can't quite see, but can feel pressing into you. You turn toward the dugout entrance without meaning to, your body already choosing the fastest route to where your mask waits. But your mind catches up in time to remind you it has to be here, with you, always. Your fingers find the satchel at your side, the familiar roughness of the canvas under your gloves. You pull it around to the front, fumbling at the flap, your hands clumsy with the sudden urgency. The straps are stiff where the damp has worked into the fabric, but you force them apart. The movement practiced enough that it happens almost without thought. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs, a short, sharp sound that makes you work faster. The gong continues to ring, its sound bouncing off the walls of the trench, guiding you in a way that words can't. You can picture the men further down the line hearing it, reacting in the same way you are now, each in his own narrow strip of trench, the urgency spreading like a ripple. The air has a bite to it now, sharper than before, and you're aware of every breath you take, each one feeling like it might be a fraction too late. You yank the mask from its satchel, the straps already twisted from where it's been stuffed in and out countless times. Your fingers fight the stubborn fabric, the damp making it cling instead of slide. Somewhere in the back of your mind is the training, how the straps should sit, how the seal should feel against your face. But that memory competes with the louder, more immediate knowledge that the gas could be on you already. Your breath catches in your throat as you force the rubber over your chin and nose, the eyepieces bumping against your forehead before sliding into place. The cold of the mask is shocking, the rubber damp from condensation that isn't even yours yet. You pull the straps down hard, feeling them bite into the back of your skull. The seal seems complete, but you still take that extra half second to press along the edges, the movement jerky in your haste. By the time you try to draw your first breath through the filter, your lungs are already demanding air, and it comes reluctantly, thin and metallic, like breathing through wet cloth. Almost immediately, the inside of the eyepieces clouds over, the warm moisture from your breath turning the glass opaque in seconds. Shapes blur and smear into each other, the outlines of men turning into shifting shadows. You wipe at one with the heel of your hand out of instinct, forgetting that it's sealed from the inside. The world remains fogged, a shifting haze that moves whether you do or not. Muffled voices reach you through the rubber, flattened into a low drone where individual words are impossible to catch. The tone is enough to convey urgency, bordering on panic. You can hear boots slamming against the duckboards, the scrape of bodies brushing past one another in the narrow space. Someone stumbles into you from behind, a shoulder knocking into your back, and then they're gone again, their movement absorbed into the chaos. The air inside the mask grows warmer with each breath, the filter resisting every inhale, making you more aware of how fast your lungs are working. Somewhere to your left, a man is bent double, hands clutching at the sides of his head where his mask should be, his voice coming in strained, ragged bursts you can't understand. Another passes you, mask in place, the rubber fitted tight, but his gait is uneven, as though each step costs him more than the last. Through the clouded lenses, you can just make out the faint shimmer of movement beyond the trench wall. The mist overhead curling in unnatural patterns. The wind carries it low, hugging the ground, and you feel the air press cold against the exposed skin of your neck where the mask doesn't reach. The smell is blocked now, replaced by the unyielding scent of rubber and stale breath. But you can still imagine it. Sharp, acrid, cutting through everything else. A figure ahead of you is struggling with his mask, the straps caught in the buckle of his helmet. He tugs hard, finally wrenching it free, but the movement is too rough, and the mask slips sideways. He fumbles again, one hand pressed to his face as if that alone might keep the seal tight. The sight makes you pull at your own straps again, reassuring yourself they're still in place, even though each adjustment only digs them deeper into your skin. Somewhere further down the line, a voice rises above the rest, a sharp, barked order that snaps heads around. It's followed by the sound of someone pounding past, their boots striking the boards in quick succession. The gong still sounds, though less regularly now, its rhythm broken by the demands of whoever is swinging the hammer. Each strike echoes, but the gaps between them feel longer than they should, as though the alarm is slowing in the face of what it warned against. Your breaths are shorter now, coming in with a faint wheeze as the filter does its work. Sweat beads along your hairline, trickling down into the edge of the mask where it meets your cheek. The condensation on the eyepieces thickens until the shapes beyond are no more than smudges of grey and brown, moving without form or detail. The noise around you is a layered jumble. Boots, voices, the scrape of equipment, all muffled into a single restless hum that seems to have no beginning or end. Then from somewhere ahead, the sound cuts through it all. A scream, raw and high-pitched, splits the air. It isn't a word, not even a cry for help. Just an unbroken ribbon of sound that starts sharp, and then frays into something hoarse and jagged. It carries above the muffled shouts, above the fading gong, above the pounding of boots, and even through the stifling rubber pressed to your face. It's clear enough to chill the back of your neck. You freeze for just a fraction of a second, the sound holding you in place, before the chaos surges forward again, carrying you with it into the mist. Your vision is little more than a shifting blur. Each step forward is taken on trust rather than sight, your feet feeling for the boards beneath them. The sound of your breathing is loud inside the mask, each inhale dragging in slow and shallow through the filter. It feels like pulling air through wet cloth, the resistance constant and unyielding, forcing you to work harder for every breath. You can hear your own heartbeat in the stillness between inhales, a steady thud that seems louder than the noise of the trench. The air around you is heavier now, pressing against your body as if it carries weight. You can feel it settle on your coat and helmet, seeping into the fabric despite the barrier of the mask. Even without the direct sting of the gas in your nose and throat, there's an awareness that it is there, a wrongness in the air, a chemical edge riding just beyond your reach. The faintest draft creeps down your neck, the exposed skin tingling in a way that makes you wish you could pull the mask lower, even though you know that would be a death sentence. Shapes move in and out of the fogged glass, men stumbling along the trench, some masked, some not. Those without masks have their hands clawing at their faces or throats, their eyes red and streaming as they fight for breath that won't come. One man leans against the wall, his helmet askew, coughing so violently his entire body shakes with the effort. The sound is muffled to you, the rubber and filter swallowing it into a dull, rhythmless thumping, but the desperation in the movement is clear. You pass another soldier crouched low, his mask hanging useless around his neck. His mouth is open wide, gasping, but his breaths are shallow, broken by spasms of coughing that leave flecks of foam at the corners of his lips. His eyes roll toward you as you pass, unfocused and wet, but you can't stop to help. You can barely see your own footing, and every moment spent still feels like another chance for the gas to find its way in. The ground beneath you is treacherous, the usual mud now coated with something that feels slicker, almost oily underfoot. Your boots slide more than they grip, and you have to use the wall for balance, your glove coming away damp and gritty. The boards that were solid earlier now seem to shift slightly under your weight, as though the gas has somehow made the wood itself soft. Every step feels deliberate, measured not by distance but by whether you stay upright. The smell inside the mask is unchanging. Rubber, sweat, the faint tang of your own breath, but your mind keeps filling in the scent of what's outside. You imagine the acrid bite of chlorine, the cloying sweetness of phosgene, the metallic sting that stories warned of. It's not there for you, not directly, but you see enough of its effect to believe every description you've ever heard. Somewhere to your right, two figures move through the haze together, one half dragging the other. Both wear masks, but the smaller man is hunched over, clutching his stomach as if trying to hold something in place inside himself. His knees buckle with every few steps, the larger man pulling him forward with jerks that make the limp head loll from side to side. The scene disappears into the fog as you move past, the outline breaking apart into nothing. Your hands ache from holding the mask tight, even though the straps should be doing the work. The instinct to keep pressing it against your face is stronger than reason. You can't stop picturing small gaps forming at the edges, invisible seams where the gas could slip in unnoticed. The pressure of the straps digs into your scalp, the bite of the buckles sitting like small knots just behind your ears. The trench narrows ahead, forcing you to turn slightly to fit through the space between the sandbags. The shift in position tilts your mask enough that you hear the faintest hiss from the filter as air is pulled through more quickly. You slow your breathing, trying to keep it even despite the urge to gasp. Every movement now feels exaggerated. The bend of your knees, the pull of your foot from the mud, the slide of your glove along the damp wall. A figure stumbles into you from the side, nearly knocking you into the trench wall. He's masked, but the straps are loose, hanging askew, and you can see condensation pooling in one eyepiece. His hands flail briefly for balance before he moves past without a word, disappearing back into the shifting grey. You turn your head to watch him go, but he's gone after a few paces, swallowed by the haze. You step forward again, the ground dipping slightly. The slickness under your boots increases, and your foot skids before catching on something soft that doesn't give like mud should. The shape rolls under your weight, and you feel your balance pitch forward. You throw out a hand to catch yourself, palms striking the damp earth, and turn quickly to see what you've tripped over. Through the blurred glass of your mask, you make out the outline of a man lying on his side. His body is curled slightly, knees drawn in, his coat bunched under him. You call to him, your voice muffled inside the mask, but there's no response. You try again, louder this time, leaning closer so he might hear. Still nothing. He doesn't move at all, not a twitch, not a shift of breath, and in the thick, heavy air, the silence feels heavier still. Hours later, the haze finally begins to loosen its grip on the trench. It's not a clean break. The fog of gas thins in slow, reluctant swirls, patches of it still lingering low to the ground, clinging to the bottoms of sandbags and pooling in the hollows where the boards sag. Your vision is still blurred, though not as badly, the shapes around you resolving into more than just shifting smudges. You can see men now, some moving, some not, though the glass of your mask is filmed over with dried condensation, and every breath still comes through the slow drag of the filter. The smell has changed. It's less overwhelming than it must have been outside the mask, but it still seeps in, faint but unmistakable. Metallic and sharp, it rides under the constant scent of rubber and stale breath, cutting into your nostrils in a way that makes you want to rub them clean. It settles in the back of your throat, too, leaving a tang you can't swallow away, as if you've been chewing on a coin for hours. Even in the thinning air, the presence of it is impossible to ignore. Those who had masks and managed to get them on in time move with the slow stiffness of men whose bodies have been on high alert for too long. They pick their way over the uneven ground, stepping carefully around the darker shapes lying in the mud. Here and there, a man kneels beside another, hand on his shoulder, but the gesture is brief. There's no urgency anymore. The urgency has already passed. The others, the ones without masks, or those whose masks failed, lie where they dropped. Some are curled in on themselves, their hands still clutching at their throats or pulling at their collars. Others are sprawled flat, one arm thrown out as if they had been reaching for something. You step over one man lying half in a trench corner, his eyes open but empty, his face marked with the pale streaks left by tears. The skin around his mouth is tinged with an unhealthy blue-grey, a colour you've never seen on a living person. A few survivors cough with a violence that shakes their whole frames. The sound is wet, rattling, followed by the splatter of something hitting the boards. One man leans forward, gripping the edge of a sandbag with both hands, his back jerking as a string of froth and mucus spills from his mouth. His eyes are bloodshot, the white almost entirely filled with red, and he squeezes them shut as another cough tears through him. No one moves to help. There's nothing to be done for it. The trench feels quieter than it should. Even with the coughing, the scrape of boots, the low mutters between those who can still speak, there's a blanket over the sound. No one talks above a whisper, and most of those whispers are exchanged between men who already know what was said before it was spoken. The gas has left a kind of stillness behind it, not just in the air, but in the way people move, in the way they keep their eyes on the ground, rather than looking too long at the faces of the others. You find a section of wall to lean against, your knees aching from the hours spent moving in the mask. Your shoulders sore from holding it tight to your face. The straps have dug deep lines into the skin around your temples, and you can feel the rawness where the rubber has rubbed against the bridge of your nose. Your breathing is shallow and quick, the air inside the mask warm and damp, making your cheeks slick with sweat. You want to tear it off, to take one deep breath of something cooler, but you keep it in place a little longer, not trusting the thinning mist entirely. Eventually, the call comes that it's clear. It's not shouted, it's passed along in that same low voice, one man to the next, until it reaches you. You hesitate before moving your hands to the straps, loosening them slowly so they don't snap back against your head. Pulling the mask away from your face feels almost unnatural. The rush of outside air, a shock after hours of filtered breath. It's cooler, yes, but it carries with it the ghost of what's just passed through here. You draw in a deep breath and immediately wish you hadn't. The air tastes wrong, like rust scraped from the inside of a pipe, mixed with the damp heaviness of high stone that's been underground too long. It sits in your mouth, coating your tongue, and you have to swallow twice to push it down. The smell matches the taste, sharp and metallic, but with a stale undercurrent, the scent of a space that's been sealed off and fouled by whatever found its way in. You know you're breathing easier without the mask, but it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like another kind of intrusion, one you can't block out now that you've let it in. The following morning comes without fanfare. No shouted orders, no clatter of tools, no distant gunfire to remind you that the war is still moving beyond the edge of the trench. The only sound that carries in the cool air is coughing, scattered at first, then overlapping in a ragged chorus that drifts from one dugout to another. It's not the polite clearing of throats you hear on cold mornings, but the deep, rattling kind that makes a man double over, his breath breaking into short, wet gasps before it steadies again. Between those bursts, the trench feels hollow, as if the air itself has been scraped thin. The ground underfoot is darker than usual, the dampness of the night still clinging to the boards and pooling in low spots. You notice the men move more slowly today, their shoulders bent, eyes half-lidded from fatigue. No one tries to fill the quiet. The unspoken agreement is that there's nothing useful to say about what happened. Those who were caught without masks, or with masks that failed, are gone now, their absence marked only by the spaces they used to take up in the dugouts and along the firing step. The routine has shifted to accommodate it, but no one comments on the change. You're given a task without ceremony. The corporal gestures toward the edge of the trench where a small group is already gathered. You join them, boots sinking slightly into the churned mud. The burial detail works with the slow efficiency of men who have done this too many times before. The dead are wrapped in blankets or whatever else can be found. Old tarpaulins, sections of tent canvas, even coats stitched together. Names are not spoken, at least not here. There will be records kept somewhere else, by someone else, but here the work is about moving bodies from where they fell to where they will be hidden from sight. The shallow graves are dug just beyond the communication trench, far enough back to be out of the way, but close enough that carrying the weight is manageable. The earth turns up dark and wet, the smell rising in sharp contrast to the metallic tang still hanging faintly in the air. The work is wordless. Men lower the wrapped bodies in pairs, boots braced, hands gripping the rough fabric. A moment is taken, not a prayer, not exactly, but a pause that feels necessary. Before the soil is shoveled back in, the sound of it landing muted by the damp. Beyond the wire, the signs of the attack are written into the ground. Patches of grass are burned down to brittle stalks. The green gone entirely, replaced with a dull yellow that crumbles at the touch. In some places, the soil itself is discoloured, stained in irregular patterns that mirror the way the gas must have settled. The smell is weaker now, but it clings in those scorched patches, as though the earth has absorbed it and isn't ready to let it go. The wire itself tells its own story. Along the lower strands, caught where the metal sags toward the ground, are the bodies of rats. They hang by their tails or lie twisted in the mud beneath, their fur matted and patchy. Some are small, almost skeletal, while others are swollen, their limbs stiff. A few hang with their teeth still clamped into the wire, as though they were caught mid-climb when the gas reached them. The sight is unsettling in a way that the human dead are not. Perhaps because the rats were always moving, always present, scurrying in and out of sight. The trench feels stranger without their constant rustling in the shadows. The medics move quietly among the living, their pace deliberate, without the urgency you've seen during bombardments. They crouch beside men who sit hunched over, checking eyes, listening to breaths through stethoscopes that glint dully in the grey light. Some cough into handkerchiefs, the fabric coming away stained with spots of red or pale froth. The medics note it without expression, making marks in small notebooks, then moving on. Where they linger, it's only to hand over a small tin of lozenges or to wrap a blanket more tightly around a man's shoulders. There's nothing to be done beyond waiting to see who will recover and who will not. The day drifts on without a clear division between morning and afternoon. The sky remains flat, the light dim but unchanging. Work parties move in slow rotation, repairing the sections of trench where the gas had pulled longest, replacing boards that have softened under the damp. The smell rises again when those boards are lifted, the air beneath them still holding the sharpness of the attack. Men work with their heads turned slightly away, breathing through cloths tied over their mouths, even though the danger has passed. You return to the dugout only when the light outside begins to fade. The air inside is warmer, but it's heavy, carrying the scent of wet wool, old lamp oil, and the faint lingering edge of the gas that seems to have embedded itself into everything. You lower yourself onto the plank bed, the wood pressing into your back through the thin blanket. Your coat hangs from a nail above you, still damp along the hem, drops of water clinging stubbornly before falling to the floor. On the bench beside your bedroll sits your gas mask, the canvas satchel, folded neatly but not closed. You find your eyes drawn to it without meaning to, the shape of it so familiar now that you can picture every crease and stain without opening the flap. The straps lie coiled loosely, the rubber hidden but not forgotten. You think about the hours you wore it, the sound of your own breathing filling the space between your ears, the weight of it pulling at the back of your head. You remember the fogged glass, the shapes moving in and out of sight, the moments when you wondered if you'd sealed it properly or if some invisible seam was letting the gas through. You tell yourself it worked this time, that it did exactly what it was meant to do. But as you lie there, the coughing from the other dugouts carrying faintly through the walls, the thought creeps in that next time might be different. Weeks pass, though the days have long since stopped feeling separate from one another. The weather changes and changes again, frost hardening the ground one morning, rain turning it to black soup the next. But your own routine remains the same. You've lived through more shelling, the kind that shakes the trench wall against your shoulder and sends splinters of timber down onto your helmet. You've endured more cold nights when the wind cut straight through your coat and left your fingers too stiff to lace your boots in the morning. You've done more drills, the same whistle and mask routine repeated until the motion is muscle memory. You've learned to work, eat and sleep without waiting for comfort to appear, because you know it won't. But the memory of the gas cloud has a way of holding on. It stays in the back of your mind, even on days when the wind is strong at your back and the sky's clear. You can see the mist curling along the ground. If you close your eyes, hear the echo of the gong and the muffled shouts through rubber. The faces of the men who didn't get their masks on in time return without invitation. The clawed hands, the streaming eyes, the foam at the lips. You tell yourself that it's in the past, but the part of you that survived only because of a few seconds' luck refuses to be convinced. The mask never leaves your side now. It rests directly beside you when you sleep. The satchel half open so you can get to it without fumbling at buckles. When you walk the trench, it hangs from your chest strap instead of your hip, where you can bring it to your face in one motion. The smell of gas, or what you think is the smell of gas, seems to find you in odd moments. It drifts into your thoughts while you're shaving, while you're writing a letter, while you're checking the wire. Sometimes it's nothing more than a faint tang carried on the breeze, and you know it's just the acrid bite of the latrines or the lingering scent of burned powder from a recent barrage. Other times it's stronger, sharper, and your hand will already be on the satchel before you've had time to decide if it's real. More often than not, you end up lowering the flap, reassured for the moment but left with a quickened pulse that takes a while to settle. Some nights you wake choking, your throat tight and your breath caught halfway, between a gasp and a cough. You sit up in the dark, convinced you can smell chlorine, the imagined green haze already coiling around your ankles. Your fingers close on the mask before your mind has fully caught up, and you pull it toward you as though the air will change in the seconds it takes to reach your face. Most of the time, nothing happens. The night stays still. The only sound the slow breathing of the men around you, and you lie back down eventually. But sleep doesn't come quickly after that, and when it does, the dreams bring you right back into the cloud you thought you'd left behind. Even in daylight, you've noticed yourself scanning the horizon differently now. You don't just look for movement in the enemy's lines or the glint of a sniper's scope. You watch the way the grass bends, the way mist gathers in dips and hollows. You track the wind by the twitch of canvas and the shifting of loose strands of wire. When the weather is still, you feel it more sharply than anyone around you, a pressure in the air that has nothing to do with rain or heat. There are other dangers here, dangers that take men without warning, and yet you find yourself less concerned with them than you once were. The crack of rifle fire overhead hardly makes you pause, unless it's close enough to throw splinters from the parapet. The whistle of incoming shells still forces you down into the mud, but the fear they bring is different, cleaner somehow, because it passes as soon as the sound moves on. Bullets and shrapnel are honest in a way gas will never be. They give you noise, light, force, things you can measure, react to, brace against. Gas gives you nothing but a smell in the air, a shift in the wind, and the sick knowledge that you may already be breathing it in before you realise it's there. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. A slow, choking wait for the wind to turn, a soldier pressed into the mud, with a mask between him and the end. He lived through the cloud, only to learn that survival meant carrying the taste of it in his throat for the rest of his days. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.